he should be held politically responsible for failings within the Met. Greater support, greater priority, greater focus from him would do no harm.
Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My respect also goes out to the brave women who have come forward, but women shouldn't need to be brave. The system should protect them and believe them when they speak out. On the 20th of September 2021, Byline News reported that more than half Met officers found guilty of sexual misconduct kept their jobs. Sure. There's a report today that says some women that report sexual abuse or misconduct may see one of those officers. The Met cannot guarantee that they're not using their power to do that. What's been exposed in the Met is structural and institutional, and I wonder if the Minister agrees with that or even understands that. And does the Minister agree that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, was right to sack Cressida Dick? And can I just say that the Minister's approach today in the Chamber, this slow kind of kick the can down the road, we'll do another review, only serves to inflict more pain on women and girls. And really the Minister needs to take that on board if she's to do her job properly. And we also need to review all of the cases that these criminal police officers have presided over, because if they're bad, they're bad. They're not just bad in one case, they're bad in all cases. Can I just say, Mr Deputy Speaker, in Brent, the tragic murder of Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman, who were murdered and the police took pictures of their bodies, the pain that their mother goes through, and I speak to their mother on a regular basis, every time there's something like this, it just inflicts more triggering pain on people who have gone through, and the police were slow to act. Now, the Minister can do something about this. The new Commissioner, Mark Rowley, has said that he needs more support in being able to sack officers, not another review, not another review, another report. He needs things to change. And as chair of the London PLP, I just wonder if the Secretary of State is willing to listen to voices from the London PLP and work with us, as well as the Met Commissioner, to change the law and legislation around this.
Well, there are some fair points raised there, and what I find very instructive on this issue, albeit on an interim basis, is the report, an interim report by Baroness Casey, which looked into the Met, its standards on vetting and procedures, and it did make for very concerning reading. It was a very in-depth, she is currently carrying out a very in-depth inquiry into this subject, and she found that the Met doesn't fully support the local professional standards units to deal with misconduct effectively, so effectively the structure relating to individual commands isn't working. There is an uncertainty about what constitutes gross misconduct and what will be done about it. There are some really important lessons to be learned from Baroness Casey's inquiry into the Met, so that we can make sure that things like this don't happen again.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. David Carrick is now one of the UK's most prolific ever rapists, and he did this while serving as a police officer. It's utterly disgusting. But does the Home Secretary agree with me that we should review sentencing laws? We've already done it for people that kill emergency workers. So how about reviewing the sentencing law, so if a serving police officer commits these horrible crimes, we increase their sentence? And does she also agree with me that the managers that knew about this should be sacked immediately and their pensions given to the victims?
Please remember sub judice, that we shouldn't be talking about sentencing. Home Secretary, just answer the points that you can.
Well, my honourable friend, again, voices the frustration and disappointment that we are all feeling today, that a serving police officer has been found responsible for such heinous and appalling crimes, an abuse of trust, has shattered public confidence in policing and has undermined the safety of women and girls. We are not going to shy away from doing what is necessary to ensure that cases like this are not repeated and that women and girls in particular can have confidence in policing around the country.
Just to remind everybody, there are aspects of this that are sub judice. Please stay well away from anything relating to things that are still before the courts. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I too commend the bravery of the women involved in this case, but frankly, some of those women would not have required to have been brave if action had been taken. As a former police officer, I am disgusted and ashamed by what I've heard. But the Metropolitan Commissioner has said that 800 of his officers are under investigation. Has the Home Secretary required similar figures from other police forces? What is the impact on the operational capability of police officers to do their business? And finally, as the Mother of the House rightly pointed out, police officers are not employed. They are not subject to employment law. They are appointed. And actually, the staff associations within the police service, such as the Federation, play a very important role in disciplinary and conduct. So what engagement is the Home Secretary having with them?
Well, the Inspectorate reported late last year into this issue, looking at forces all over the country and looking at their performance when it comes to vetting and monitoring of disciplinary matters when it comes within policing. The Inspectorate made 43 recommendations, largely focused at Chief Constables around England and Wales, the College of Policing and the MPCC. They've all been accepted. They have to be, there are deadlines for spring of this year and then later of this year, and we're closely monitoring the implementation and delivery of all of those recommendations.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We hear reported on the BBC that this monster, David Carrick, perpetrated a campaign of terror against his girlfriends. He put drugs in the car, he restrained her with police handcuffs. He said, "Who would anyone believe? You or me? I'm an important person, I guard the Prime Minister, I'm a police officer." This highlights the lengths to which this monster would go, and also the challenge for those victims to come forward. So as well as the very welcome measures that the Home Secretary set out before us today, all of which I support, does she agree with me that one thing we can do, a positive thing we can do, is bring forward the Victims Bill to strengthen the support of the criminal justice system to these women, to provide better support, to beef up the role of the independent sexual violence advisors? I know it's not her department, but will she work with me and work with her colleague, the Justice Secretary, to see if we can get parliamentary time for this bill as quickly as possible?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to her groundbreaking work when she was in government to support women and girls and their safety. She's absolutely right, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, Deputy Prime Minister, is committed to introducing the Victims Bill. I'm particularly supportive of increasing the number of ISVAs and IDVAs. I think they've made a huge difference to the experience of victims going through the criminal justice system. They can make the difference between a victim withdrawing and a victim persisting and reaching a conviction. So I think, yes, putting more resources through and introducing important legislation is absolutely vital.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When the Education Secretary was asked on the radio yesterday if the government could say that women could trust the police, she replied, "It's very important that we do trust the police." In other words, I think that's a no. We cannot have a situation where women who would ordinarily be turning to the police to rescue them from dangerous situations, whether it's out on the street, whether it's domestic violence, whether they're the victim of abuse, feel that the very person that they might be seeking help from is somebody that they can't trust and might actually violate them as well. So I endorse what everyone has said about we need to address this culture within the police force, but can the Home Secretary set out a timetable where she can tell us what immediate action she will take to address this, so that women who are in danger feel that they can look to the police for support?
Listen, I'll be the first person to say that this is obviously a disappointing, frustrating, sobering and chilling day for policing. And it is regrettable and a shame that this has happened. I would also say that the poorly behaved, the criminal police officers do make up a minority. And we do have tens of thousands of very brave, dedicated men and women all over the country who will be feeling the equivalent level of shame and disgust that we are expressing here today. This is not in their name. This is about changing a system so that we root out poor behaviour and so that everybody can be proud to be serving in our police force.
Mary Robinson.
Deputy Speaker. The case has once again highlighted the terrible internal processes within our police forces, and also the inability of people to speak up in a culture which actively works against them doing so. So many police officers will not raise issues with fellow police officers because they fear for their jobs, they fear for their employments. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to do a root and branch investigation into the culture within the police forces, particularly with regard to the ability to speak up and whistleblowers to have their voices heard?
It's an important point that my honourable friend raises, and that is exactly what part 2 of the Lady Angelini inquiry will cover: police culture, and how and whether there is a culture of fear, whether people are scared to speak up and call out unacceptable behaviour. We need to pinpoint it precisely so that we can then take action to ensure that there is an open and welcoming and professional environment within which everybody can thrive.
Carol Moynihan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There are many similarities here in the experience of women within the police, the Met Police, and women within the armed forces. Both organisations in which we should have complete faith, but both organisations which have failed to act on many occasions where there are situations of misogyny. There are two big issues for me here. There are the crimes of the perpetrator himself, but there is also the failure of senior officers to act and take action when concerns have been raised. Now, the Home Secretary has talked about how action is going to be taken on offenders. She's said much less about what's going to happen with senior officers who are aware of such behaviour and have covered it up. Could she say some more about that, please?
Here.
Well, I think that goes to the point about the structures in place to closely monitor new recruits and ensure that people who are newer to policing get the right training and support from their senior leaders. And that's why, as part of our historic Police Uplift programme, which is going to result in record numbers of police officers when we are complete in a few months' time, a large part of that resource has gone to increasing the vetting capacity, the recruitment resource, so that proper standards and quality assurance is injected and really part of the process of recruiting new police officers.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We operate on a model of policing by consent, and I'm afraid too many people, especially women and girls, will be looking at this and saying, I don't consent, I don't agree to this model of policing in the country anymore, and this is just the latest example of what we've seen in the Met. Cases like this set back trust in the police. They make it more difficult for decent, law-abiding officers to do their jobs. And it's shameful that Carrick's case has been allowed to carry on for so long with information apparently known to the force and other forces without being shared, without action being taken on it. So there are clear lessons we can learn here about data sharing, about improving whistleblowing, about suspending officers without allowing them to operate on light duties, about removing officers who we are deeply concerned about. It's great that we are having these reviews, it's great we're trying to learn lessons from them, but I think what people want is concrete action, and action quickly. Can the Home Secretary please advise when we will see that?
Well, as I said, my honourable friend raises the right point about action, and that's why a recent review of vetting capacity as of recently as October of last year, carried out by the Uplift programme, showed that 36 forces had responded and 25 had increased their capacity in vetting units between February and October of last year. I see that as action. I see that as police forces responding to the call to improve their services, improve their resources, and ensure that there are better processes and better systems in place to properly vet and rigorously monitor the behaviour of their professionals.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr Deputy Speaker, as a former Detective Inspector in the Metropolitan Police, like everyone, I am shocked, revulsed and horrified to hear of the abhorrent crimes of PC Carrick and the failure of the Metropolitan Police and other police services which allowed these crimes to go undetected and unprosecuted for almost 20 years. Mr Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of honest, hard-working and brave serving and retired police officers everywhere, I offer my sincere apologies to the victims in these cases, whose needs must be prioritised and given our complete and unquestioning support. Will the Home Secretary confirm to the House that an investigation will be launched immediately, as identified in her review announced today, to identify and prosecute to the full extent of the law or the most severe disciplinary action against any police officer or member of the police staff, past or present, who failed in their duty to protect the public in public office by not reporting or investigating complaints against PC Carrick and preventing him from being arrested, prosecuted and brought to justice before now.
I can't comment on the individual case, but what Baroness Casey's review concluded on an interim basis late last year was that it's taking too long to resolve misconduct cases within policing. Officers and staff do not believe that action will be taken when concerns around conduct are raised. Those are just a sample of some of the very serious concerns that she identified when it comes to the process in place for monitoring and disciplining police officers for unacceptable behaviour. I pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman's service within the police force, but I know that whatever is needed to be changed, we will do it.
Bailey.
Mr Deputy Speaker, women in Stroud and around the country have woken up with their trust and belief in our police service badly shaken yet again. And I know from speaking to local women that issues in the Met undermine their confidence in Stroud Police, and they can see that the Gloucestershire Constabulary is working hard to protect them, and they can see that they're open to change. But when we know that women are routinely not reporting violence, abuse and harassment, in part because of lack of faith in the police, and with each force doing something completely different, what is my right honourable friend doing to ensure that all police forces get their act together and show the country that they are speaking to each other and that we're going to make national change on this issue?
My honourable friend's absolutely right to raise the issue about the confidence of women in policing. Tangible steps and measures have already been taken after legislating in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act to address concerns surrounding data extraction from victims' devices during investigations. We are well on the way to ensuring that victims are not without a phone for more than 24 hours. That's been a real deterrent to women coming forward with complaints about rape or serious sexual offences. We've led with the groundbreaking Operation Soteria programme, radical transformation on the way the police investigate rape and serious sexual offences. We're also protecting the well-being of victims during trials by offering pre-recorded evidence for rape victims. Those are just a few of the measures that we are taking to send the message to women and girls: come forward if you are a victim, and if you do, the police will be there to support you.
Lawrence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary just mentioned that she wants women and girls to come forward with those issues and allegations of rape. The charge rate for rape is 1.5%. This means that the vast majority of those cases will never go to court, let alone secure a conviction. This is not working for women and girls. The courage that they have in coming forward, then to know that it will never secure that. It's a slap in the face yet again for those women and girls. What real action is the Home Secretary going to change to reverse this?
Well, I've been working with cross-government colleagues for several years now in my former capacity as the Attorney General on matters like Operation Soteria. And Operation Soteria is groundbreaking, and it is producing real change in the way victims of rape and serious sexual offences are experiencing the criminal justice system. We are seeing an increase in referrals by the police to the Crown Prosecution Service. That is a sign of progress. We are seeing an increase in the rate of charge by the Crown Prosecution, passing the case on to the court service. And we will see an improvement in the number of convictions that we secure. I agree, there is a lot to do, but progress has been made.
Laura Farris.
The first allegation of serious sexual assault was made against David Carrick in 2003, and over the course of the next 18 years, there were 8 or 9 allegations of rape, and through all of that, he was not suspended from work. In fact, during that period, he was actually promoted within the force. What is common to all of these cases is that there appears to be some kind of omerta or closing of ranks between senior personnel when a criminal allegation is made against one of their brethren. Does my right honourable friend agree that the time has come to outsource the disciplinary decision-making decision to either another force or, at the very least, an officer who does not know the policeman who is the subject matter of this kind of allegation?
My honourable friend's right to point to the failings. In sum, the Metropolitan Police should have carried out a revet of David Carrick in 2011. This wasn't done until 2017. And the Metropolitan Police acknowledge that this would not have necessarily changed the vetting outcome. So those systemic problems are prevalent, and that's why we need to take action to fix them.
Ed Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. We're back again, Home Secretary. I'm just exhausted about the number of times in this House we have to talk about this issue. Because women in Lancashire have seen what's happened and what's been in the newspapers about David Carrick, and they saw about Wayne Couzens, and they've seen about so many other cases, Home Secretary. And they want to know why there is no legal requirement for vetting when officers move between forces. So yes, we're talking about the Met today, but we could equally be talking about Lancashire Constabulary. So Home Secretary, I'd like to know what plans are in place to legally require vetting when officers move between forces to stop these perpetrators moving around the country to avoid justice.
Well, we need to ensure that there's the right system in place to actually properly identify inappropriate candidates. What we've seen thus far is that actually there are inappropriate processes so that people who are not right for policing are falling through the gaps, falling through the net. That needs to change. That's why I'm glad that the Met Commissioner has actually already committed to instilling an anti-corruption and abuse command unit to properly look at how people are who are inappropriately getting into the police force, and we will take further action to look at the disciplinary process and the reports which are currently running their course need to conclude, so we have an evidence base to take the appropriate action in legislation if necessary.
Teresa Villiers.
It's an utterly shameful and appalling case. I've seldom seen such a palpable sense of shock in this chamber as we've witnessed today. And in responding to these terrible crimes, I hope the Home Secretary will also look at the Benjamin Hannam case of a few years back, where it is deeply worrying that someone who had been a member of a banned extremist group, National Action, managed to be recruited as a probationary police officer.
Well, I think all cases are abhorrent, and where confidence in policing is shattered, and the reputation of the force is undermined. That's why we want to ensure that chief constables take the recommended action, which has been set out comprehensively, increasing the minimum standards for pre-employment checks, establishing better processes for managing risks relating to vetting decisions, and ensuring that the quality and consistency of their vetting decision-making is improved.
Pam Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I undertook the police and parliamentary scheme with both the Metropolitan Police and Avon and Somerset, going into the homes and situations of the country's most vulnerable people, overwhelmingly women. That those women can't be confident about those police officers is an abhorrent situation. But we've heard nothing from the Home Secretary about what she's going to do to finally introduce mandatory national views on vetting. People in Bristol, particularly women in Bristol, want to know that all those police officers are being vetted appropriately, that applies across the country. Will she now commit to that being operationalised?
Well, the government legislated in February of 2020 to strengthen the police complaints and discipline systems, making them more transparent, more proportionate and more accountable. This included new powers for the independent office, the IOPC, including the power of initiative, ensuring that the IOPC can commence investigations without requiring a referral from the police, as well as measures to streamline and speed up decision-making. Those build on previous reforms, and as I've announced today, we will carry out a more in-depth review into the disciplinary process, and if legislation is needed to change, then we will do that.
Utterly shameful and shocking case. The vast majority of police officers in the Met and across the country believe in and perform to the highest professional standards, but they want to see their fellow officers who do not have appropriate action taken against them. But the problem is they just don't believe that appropriate action will be taken. And chief constables are tearing their hair out because they know they have some officers who are not fit to be in the police service, but they can't dismiss them easily. So can I join the calls from the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Camberwell and Peckham, for the government to bring forward legislation to revise the dismissal procedures for police officers, because the sooner we get rid of police officers who are not fit to serve, the better it will be for all concerned.
I agree wholeheartedly with my right honourable friend. As Baroness Casey identified in her interim review at the end of last year, the misconduct process takes too long. Officers and staff don't have confidence in the process. Allegations relating to sexual misconduct, other discriminatory behaviour are less likely than other misconduct allegations to result in a case to answer decision. There is a real need for action to take place. That's why we're going to come up with the proposals on the back of the review that I've announced today.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When Sarah Everard was abducted from a street in Lambeth, not far from my constituency, and brutally murdered by a serving police officer with a history of predatory behaviour, the then Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police said there was zero tolerance of misogyny in the Met. The appalling crimes of David Carrick show that this was clearly not the case, and the current Commissioner says that there are between 800 and 1,000 officers currently under investigation for abuse. So can I ask the Home Secretary, because she hasn't answered this question so far today, what is she doing to ensure that there are actually consequences and accountability for the enablers in police forces up and down the country who protect abusers and allow them to continue their activities under cover of their warrant card? Because dealing with that issue is an essential prerequisite for zero tolerance to mean anything at all.
Well, the action that needs to be taken has been set out incredibly widely and comprehensively in several reports. That includes increasing the minimum standards for pre-employment checks, establishing better processes for assessing, analysing and managing the risks relating to vetting decisions, corruption investigations and information security, improving the quality and the consistency of decision-making when it comes to vetting, and extending the scope of the law relating to the police complaint and misconduct procedures. There's a very clear plan of action that is necessary amongst Chief Constables, the College of Policing and the MPPC, and the Home Office is monitoring and taking action where necessary.
Mr. Graham.
Mr Deputy Speaker, today's debate shows the depth of violence against women and girls, even by some of those in whom the public should have the greatest trust, and therefore public confidence in policing will be rattled. The Home Secretary said that David Carrick had been recruited before tightened vetting rules were introduced. So will my right honourable friend work with local police chiefs to find out how many people in their forces are, in their view, potentially dangerous to the wider public, so that they and we can reassure our constituents as soon as possible that there are no David Carricks lurking in Gloucestershire or elsewhere?
Well, that is exactly why, for the Met, the Met Commissioner has instituted a review of historic cases where there may be a flag for a domestic incident, and they are rigorously checking their data against national databases. I encourage all Chief Constables to take similar action to ensure that similar cases can be rooted out and action can be taken.
Bedford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the problems that Mark Rowley faces in the Metropolitan Police run very deep indeed. I've been supporting a constituent of mine with her allegations of threatening and controlling behaviour against a senior police officer. And in the 2 years that I've been supporting her, the police have completely failed to investigate the case properly. They've failed to consider the impact on the children, failed to interview witnesses, failed to get essential medical records. And these are senior officers that are standing in the way of this investigation, as was the case with Wayne Couzens, as was the case with David Carrick. So Mark Rowley is making specific requests to assist him in making the changes that he needs to make in the Metropolitan Police. We cannot wait for another review. So will she commit to sitting down with Mark Rowley and give him the resources and the support that he needs now?
Very good.
May I just clarify one point that I referred to earlier? When it comes to some of the findings of Baroness Casey, I just want to be clear that the allegations that she found relating to sexual misconduct and other discriminatory behaviours are less likely than other misconduct allegations to result in a case-to-answer decision. I think I might have said the opposite before. But what I say, I agree. That's why I've built a very strong relationship with Sir Mark Rowley. I spoke to him yesterday. I have been speaking to him regularly about exactly what action we are taking, both from a parliamentary and legislative point of view, but also from an operational perspective on the ground.
This is an appalling case and another very dark day for the Metropolitan Police, for our trust in them, and particularly for women's trust in them. It's not the first, and I fear it won't be the last. While I applaud what the government is doing in terms of better prosecution of rape and support for victims, those are after the fact. We need to work on prevention, and prevention comes through culture, as many others have said. Does she agree that there are two aspects of that culture? There's the casual day-to-day misogyny that we see from the nicknames that some of their fellow officers, not all, had for them themselves. But there's also the institutional misogyny and denial that came from the multiple reports that were made to the Metropolitan Police, the opportunities for vetting that were all missed and resulted in many, many more rapes. And will she work with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to address both these aspects of the culture?
My honourable friend's absolutely right that I must say that the vast majority of police officers uphold the highest standards of behaviour and professionalism, but there are pockets of culture whereby standards fall short. We need to root that out, and the first thing to do is to identify exactly what form it takes, the extent to which it is prevalent, and then we will know the steps that we can legitimately take to stop it happening again.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. David Carrick was a Metropolitan Police officer, but many of his crimes were perpetrated in Hertfordshire, where many of them would have been reported. As a Hertfordshire MP, I would like to pay tribute to the bravery and perseverance of the rape survivors, but could I ask the Secretary of State, will the actions or inaction of Hertfordshire Police be looked at as part of any review? And could I push her again, as many other colleagues have done, to confirm that she will introduce vetting of officers when they transfer between forces, and will she also look at outsourcing disciplinary actions?
Well, there is obviously going to be the Carrick case will be looked at by Lady Angelini, and hopefully those issues that she refers to will be fleshed out. But I am also interested in the point that she raises about transfer of police officers. It's been identified that insufficient vetting is taking place when police officers are moving between forces. We need to take the action to improve that.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is another case and a long list of cases, and it's not just on misogyny, it's on race, and it's on homophobia. Yeah. And we know that when Sadiq Khan called in the Commissioner and asked her, the then Commissioner, to produce a report about what she was going to do, rather than doing her work, she walked out the door and had the backing of this government rather than backing Sadiq Khan. So now we know that this is a systemic problem in the Metropolitan Police and probably police around the country. Is it time that we move disciplinary matters away from the police force concerned and allow women and other victims to be able to report to an independent service when it's regarding a police officer without fear or favour that it will be covered up?
Well, I think what is important is that we ensure that whatever disciplinary process is in place is that it actually works. it's clear that there are serious questions about its efficacy, the time it takes, the process-heavy experience, and ultimately that bureaucracy and procedure are prevailing over ethics and common sense. We need to ensure that the system is fit for purpose and that police officers who are falling short in their behaviour are dismissed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a policing issue, but it's not just a matter for policing. It's also a societal issue, and how we deal with predators who are determined and devious. It's a fundamental issue about safeguarding and the professional misjudgments that are made that allow this behaviour to go unreported. Will the Home Secretary raise the issue of safeguarding and its need to cut across all policy areas to ensure that vulnerable people are protected with her Cabinet colleagues?
Well, we have a designated Minister for Safeguarding. She sits alongside me here, and so definitely in the Home Office we prioritise the welfare of women and girls and victims of crime more generally. There's a huge project of work ongoing, an important relationship with stakeholders, and it's important that confidence amongst victims and those who are directly affected by these heinous crimes are supported in the maximum possible way by the criminal justice system.
Jim Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank very much the Home Secretary for outlining her plan of action to respond in a positive and strong way. Trust in the police is an essential component of the justice system, and whilst it's clear that trust has been broken and down, we cannot forget that that there is an overwhelming number of decent and solid policemen and policewomen in our forces across the United Kingdom. Rebuilding trust in the screening process may take some work. So how does the Home Secretary intend to ensure that all local forces implement lessons learned in the Met to restore confidence? Because confidence restored is what we need. Thank you.
Home Secretary.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and there is a large amount of work now, not only for the Met, but also the wider policing family to restore and rebuild trust and confidence amongst the general public, but also women and girls. I visited some local forces, Kent Police I visited before Christmas, and actually there is a very good example of how the force is really leading from the front, instituting a whole raft of operational measures to support victims of serious sexual offences and rape, and rebuilding trust with local communities. So it is possible, and I'm very heartened by the progress that I'm seeing around the country.
That completes the statements. Those who wish to leave, please do so. Right, we come to the next statement. I call the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alister Jack.
Mr. Speaker, today I will make an order under Section 35 of the Scotland Act 1998, preventing the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from proceeding to royal assent. This order will mean the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament will not submit the bill for royal assent. This government believes, however, that transgender people deserve our respect, our support and our understanding. My decision is centred on the legislation's consequences for the operation of reserved matters, including equality legislation across Scotland, England and Wales. The Scottish Government's bill would introduce a new process for applying for legal gender recognition in Scotland. The changes include reducing the minimum age a person can apply for a gender recognition certificate from 18 to 16, and removing the need for a medical diagnosis and evidence of having lived for 2 years in their acquired gender. The bill would amend the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which legislated for a single gender recognition system across the United Kingdom and which received a legislative consent motion from the Scottish Parliament. The approach taken in the Scottish Government's Gender Recognition Reform Bill was the subject of intense debate in the Scottish Parliament. A number of significant amendments were tabled right up until the end of the bill's passage, and the Minister for Women and Equalities corresponded with and met with the Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson to discuss the UK Government's concerns before the bill had reached its final stage. Mr. Speaker, I have not taken this decision lightly. The Government has looked closely at the potential impact of the bill, and I have considered all relevant policy and operational implications together with the Minister for Women and Equalities. And it is our assessment that the bill would have a serious adverse impact, among other things, on the operation of the Equality Act 2010. Those adverse effects include impacts on the operation of single-sex clubs, associations and schools, and protections such as equal pay. The Government shares the concerns of many members of the public and civic society groups regarding the potential impact of the bill on women and girls. The bill also risks creating significant complications from having two different gender recognition regimes in the UK and allowing more fraudulent or bad faith applications. The Government is today publishing a full statement of reasons alongside the order, which will set in full the adverse effects the Government is concerned about. Mr. Speaker, I would like to address the claims put forward by those who would seek to politicise this decision and claim that this is some kind of constitutional outrage. And you can hear them, Mr. Speaker, you can hear them. The Section 35 power was included in the Scotland Act, which established the Scottish Parliament. This is the first time the power has been exercised, and I acknowledge that this is a significant decision. The powers of Section 35 of the Scotland Act are not new, and this Government has not created them. They have existed as long as devolution itself. And we should be clear that the power was included in the Act by the architects of the devolution for a reason. Donald Dewar himself noted that the power struck an important balance. The Section 35 power provides a sensible measure to ensure that devolved legislation does not have adverse impacts on reserved matters, including on the equalities legislation, such as the Equality Act 2010. This is not about preventing the Scottish Parliament from legislating on devolved matters, but about ensuring that we do not have legal frameworks in one part of the United Kingdom which have adverse effects on reserved matters. And we should be clear that this is absolutely not about the United Kingdom Government being able to veto Scottish Parliament legislation whenever it chooses, as some have implied. The power can only be exercised on specific grounds, and the fact that this is the first time it has been necessary to exercise the power in almost 25 years of devolution emphasises that it is not a power to be used lightly. In the instance of the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill, I have concluded that the bill would have serious adverse effects on the operation of the Equality Act 2010, and as I've set out in my correspondence with the First Minister yesterday, I would prefer not to be in this situation. The United Kingdom Government does all we can to respect the devolution settlement and to resolve disputes. It is open to the Scottish Government to bring back an amended bill for reconsideration in the Scottish Parliament. So to conclude, Mr. Speaker, I have set out to the Scottish Government that should they choose to do so, I hope we can work together to find a constructive way forward that both respects devolution and the operation of the United Kingdom Parliament legislation, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement? This is an incredibly serious moment. It's the first time Section 35 has been invoked. Donald Dewar has already been mentioned, the father of devolution, of course, designed Section 35 to protect devolution. It was passed by all parties in this House and hasn't been objected to since. It was intended not as a blocking mechanism, but an enabling mechanism, so that the Scottish Parliament could pass legislation and devolve competencies without changing reserved functions. There was concern at the time by colleagues of the Secretary of State that this could be used as a veto. So a memorandum of understanding was agreed. It said, and I quote, "Although the UK Government is prepared to use these powers if necessary, it sees them as very much a matter of last resort. The UK Government and the administration concerned will therefore aim to resolve any difficulties through discussion so as to avoid any action or omission by the devolved administration having an adverse impact on non-devolved matters." So can I ask the Secretary of State, is this a last resort? Has the Secretary of State had extensive discussions with the Scottish Government before taking this action? No. How many times has the Secretary of State met with the Scottish Government before the bill was passed, during its debate in Holyrood and since its passage? It appears to me that this has only become a last resort in terms of the legal timing because both governments can't and won't work with each other. Yeah. The Secretary of State says the Section 35 is being used, among other reasons, in relation to the Equality Act. Both the Scotland Act and the Equality Act are landmark pieces of Labour legislation. establishing devolution and enshrining rights to be free of discrimination in law. Nobody has to question this party's commitment to equality. We passed the initial GRA, we brought in the Disability Discrimination Act, and we got the world-leading Equality Act into law. But clearly, there's a need for laws passed by Holyrood and those by Westminster to interact. And in this case, the trans community need that cross-border interaction to work. Part of the reason that after 25 years of devolution, Section 35 has never been exercised is largely because of the way devolution was set up and intended to operate. Governments with their own agendas, but with a common purpose, working together to serve the Scottish people. Now Scotland is saddled with an administration in Edinburgh that's hell-bent on breaking devolution and a Conservative administration here in London that's intent on ignoring it. Indeed, the Secretary of State seems to spend more time with government lawyers to stop things happening rather than make them work, and the Scottish Government is spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on lawyers challenging laws they know are unchallengeable in order to manufacture political grievance. And in this case, it's the public who are let down. Trans people who suffer intense discrimination will now not see this legislation take effect anytime soon, if at all, and women's rights groups who will likely not see their concerns addressed or their fears alleviated, because this simple truth is that this has turned into a constitutional bun fight. Yeah. I would also suggest that the SNP would be rightly screaming, and they are doing today and would do so in the past, if a piece of legislation passed in this place had implications for default competencies. They would challenge that, and they would rightly challenge that, as is their right. And if we are to accept the argument from the Scottish Government that there is no effect on the Equality Act, then the courts will surely strike out this Section 35 action, as we believe the Scottish Government will take it to court. Mr Speaker, can I also ask the Secretary of State, Scottish Labour got the primacy of the Equality Act on the face of the Gender Recognition Bill. Will the statutory instrument that he detailed in his statement give the details of where he thinks it is incompatible? Yes. The Secretary of State said last night there was a version of this Act which the UK Government could support. So what does that look like? But he says in his statement there are complications with two different gender regimes. Is he saying the Scottish Parliament shouldn't have the competence? As the bill was debated in Holyrood, was it not obvious to him and to his colleagues that it could contravene reserved law? What did he do about it then? During the passage of the bill, Scottish Labour made clear that if the bill was to work, clear guidance was required. The SNP Scottish Government said it was for the Equality and Human Rights Commission to provide such guidance, not them as the Government. Why doesn't the Secretary of State instruct the EHRC to provide that guidance, look at the cross-border issues he mentions, and provide recommendations as to the interaction of the Equality Act? Both governments should commit to accepting those conclusions. Or is the Secretary of State saying that the ball is only in the Scottish Government's court to bring back amended legislation, and he now backs out of the process? Mr Speaker, we support the principle of updating the GRA, which when the Labour Government introduced in 2004 was world-leading, but 2 decades on now requires modernisation to humanise and to remove the indignities in this dreadful process. We've ended up in a legal and constitutional impasse. My final question to the Secretary of State is, what is he going to do to resolve it?
Well, Mr Speaker, to answer his questions, hopefully in the right order, it is not a last resort. To understand the Scotland Act, the Section 33 is where the UK legislation is directly changed, and Section 35 is when it's adversely affected. And we have 28 days to make a decision in either case before the legislation goes for royal assent. And in this case, the legal test that has been given to us and proved by our officials is one of Section 35, which is adverse effect on on 2 parts of UK/GB legislation. So that's where we're at. We have 28 days to make that decision, and we have to make a decision in that time frame. And in this case, this very senior legal opinion advises us that a Section 35 is appropriate. And we will see that in my statement of reasons, which we have laid with the order. On his second point, officials have been meeting with officials in the Scottish Government since the bill was introduced, and the Minister for Gender and Equalities wrote, after the second stage, wrote to the Bill Minister expressing her concerns and asking for a meeting, and that meeting took place, and again, her concerns were expressed at that meeting. Regarding the EHRC, the EHRC have said that they're willing to work with and support the Scottish Government if they can. However, they make it very clear that their ongoing concerns are still on the record, and that's where that rests. And I think that addresses all the points that he raised. Well, but if any are not addressed, I'm sure others in the chamber will ask those questions.
Douglas Ross.
Just outlined in his statement how the UK government has sought to constructively engage with the Scottish Government during the passage of this bill prior to it being voted on in the Scottish Parliament. Yet Nicola Sturgeon has now tried to turn this into a political battle between the Scottish and UK government, when all, as I understand it, the Scottish Secretary and the government are trying to do is protect women's rights. So despite the howls that we are getting from the SNP, can the Scottish Secretary confirm that all the SNP have to do is bring forward a bill in the Scottish Parliament that protects the rights of women and girls across the United Kingdom?
Yes, and actually I think that, Mr. Speaker, fortunately that addresses one of the points that the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland raised, and I can address that here. I mean, I have written to the First Minister. I've suggested that we meet to resolve these issues, and it is the case that the Scottish Government's bill has adverse effects on those two pieces of Scottish legislation. You will see it in the Statement of Reasons, which has been produced by our legal advisers. And what is missing is sufficient protections and safeguards for women and children that are reflected in existing Westminster legislation, and that is why I have had to lay this order.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Dr Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Vetoing this legislation is an unprecedented attack on the Scottish Parliament, which passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill 86 to 39, including MSPs from every single party. Gender recognition is a devolved policy area, and this does not change the 2010 Equality Act or give any additional rights to those with a certificate. It shortens and simplifies the process, and particularly ends the requirement for a psychological diagnosis of gender dysphoria. This is in keeping with the guidance from the World Health Organization and UN, which recommends change to a legal statutory process based on self-identification. This change has already been made by many countries over the last decade, including neighbours Ireland, Belgium, Denmark. But this government is threatening to end UK acceptance of international certificates. I find it bizarre, considering the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, suggested a similar proposal in 2017. So can the Secretary of State explain exactly which parts of the Equality Act are changed by this bill? Why did he not raise specific concerns during the two consultations carried out by the Scottish Parliament, or in response to the Cabinet Secretary's letter in October, rather than a response that came 3 days before the final debate on the bill? What modifications is he suggesting to the bill that wouldn't include a return to the outmoded medicalised process? Why is he using one of the most marginalised groups in society to pick a fight with the Scottish Parliament? Is he seriously, after 300 years of different marriage ages and voting ages, suggesting there can no longer be legal or age differences north and south of the border? And does he recognise that vetoing this bill simply highlights the hollow reality of devolution?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady won't be surprised to hear that I don't recognise very much of what she said as being correct, and I would point her to the Statement of Reasons, which will be laid alongside this order today, and our legal advice is very clear. The Equality Act 2010 is reserved, and there are adverse effects. And they will be there in the Statement of Reasons. And I listed some of those in my statement I made only moments ago. I listed them areas around associations, women's safe spaces, single-sex clubs, single-sex schools, etc., etc. It was very clear. It was very clear what I said, and you will see what legal counsel have determined when you see the statement of reasons.
Laura Ferris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A Conservative government standing up for women's sex-based rights in Scotland. I congratulate the government on this decision, which we know will protect women's sex-based specialist services in areas like rape crisis. But does he... But does he agree with me? Given the verdict of the UN Special Rapporteur, given the verdict of Dr. Hilary Cass, which is not yet complete, it is essential that every corner of the United Kingdom reaches an agreed position on the age limit for a gender recognition certificate.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker.
Chair of the Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
This is the single biggest attack on Scottish devolution and Scottish democracy since the establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. A move to strike down a piece of legislation which is supported by every single party in the Parliament is as provocative as it is anti-democratic. When the Scotland Act went through Parliament back in 97-98, the Conservatives then called Section 35 the colonial general rule. Is he now the real-life colonial general imposing his view on a reluctant Scottish Parliament in the name of his and his party's culture wars?
Mr. Speaker, I come back to my original point. This is a decision I didn't take it lightly. It was after much consideration of the legal advice that we received, and it is based on a Section 35 order which is in the 1998 Scotland Act, an act that was brought forward by the Labour Party, led through Parliament by Donald Dewar, and voted for by the Scottish National Party.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the central point here that devolution is not the same as independence? And in every devolution, to the disappointment of some, I accept, but in every devolution settlement, including ours, every devolved legislature has to legislate with consideration for the other parts of the United Kingdom. If that does not happen, Section 35 is the appropriate instrument for the UK government to consider the use of. And isn't the visceral reaction to the government's temerity in even considering the use of Section 35, where there are clear conflicts between the devolved approach and the UK approach, a demonstration that there is no acceptance on the part of the SNP of the devolution settlement at all?
Well, my learned right honourable friend is absolutely right. I mean, devolution is about granting powers, not giving powers away, and not ceding powers. And that is what the Devolution Act does. That Westminster, through the Devolution Act, gave powers to the Scottish Parliament, but the Act was very clear. It kept Section 33 and Section 35 for when there were conflicts, and a conflict has arisen here in the case of adverse effects towards UK-wide legislation in the terms of the two acts that will be referred to in the Statement of Reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State claims that there is a version of this bill that the UK government will accept, and indeed it has been noted by the Chair of the Women and Equalities Select Committee in this place that the bill is broadly in line with the recommendations made by their committee following their inquiry into the Gender Recognition Act. Can the Minister explain why he did not work together with counterparts in Holyrood to avoid this unnecessary and unprecedented constitutional collision? And will the Minister now make a statement here in this House as to what reform to the GRA the government will make across the UK if they're seeking to block progressive reform in Scotland?
Well, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that I am doing the constitutional part here in my role as Secretary of State for Scotland, and the Section 35 order is where the legal advice has taken me. The Minister who's on the bench, the Minister for Gender and Equalities, will deal with the policy, and it's and you should absolutely raise your point with her.
Liam Fox. Sir Liam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many in the House who will agree with the content of the Scottish Government's bill. And there are many in the House, I have to say, including myself, who will object to the contents of, but that is not the point at issue here today. We live in a unitary state. To have different gender recognition certification processes in different parts of the United Kingdom are likely to produce conflict and confusion. Does my right honourable friend agree that it was never part of the devolution settlement that any one part of devolved government across the United Kingdom could effectively change or require a change for citizens across the whole of our unitary nation?
I absolutely agree, Mr. Speaker.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's invoking of Section 35 in this case, as the bill clearly conflicts with the Equality Act and would have repercussions for women across the UK. Does the Secretary of State recognise the strength of feeling amongst women's rights groups and activists in Scotland that this bill seeks to allow anyone at all to legally self-identify as either sex and therefore enter all spaces, including those necessarily segregated by sex, such as domestic violence settings, changing rooms and prisons? And given the previous UQ, does he not understand how vitally important this is at the moment?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think the honourable lady deserves a lot of respect for her courage in standing up on this issue. And I think when the statement of reasons is read later today, she will be proved to be absolutely right in the things she's saying.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Having served as a Minister in the Scotland Office alongside my right honourable friend for a couple of years, I know how compassionately and diligently he has looked into these matters. It is a complex issue. There are lots of consequences. But do we not owe it to everyone to look at these matters dispassionately, to work through the points of conflict and turn the dial down on some of the heat that's been generated?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The tone is very important in these matters, and it is not a decision that I've taken lightly. It is after due consideration of the legal advice received. And yes, let's take the heat out of these matters. Let's deal with the legal issues and then see if there's a resolution we can find.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we've had 6 years of wide consultation, two-thirds of MSPs supporting the legislation, in support from MSPs from every single political party in the Scottish Parliament, the SNP, the Conservatives, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. Yet these actions from the Tory government are shameful and actually quite scary. So does the Secretary of State for Scotland share my concerns that this decision sets a dangerous precedent where Westminster dictates and Holyrood must simply shut up and do as they are told?
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker, obviously I don't. You know, in 24 years, the Scottish Parliament has passed 347 acts. The Scottish Government the United Kingdom Government has never used the Section 35 Act in that time. It has been deemed, the legal advice has been deemed that we should use it this time, and that is what we've done because there are adverse effects on UK-wide legislation.
Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I point out to my right honourable friend that as opposition spokesman on the devolution bills when they were passing through Parliament in 1988, I took part in the debate where the question of the devolution of equality rights was explicitly debated. I pointed out that anti-discrimination laws have to be handled with great care because it is all too easy to substitute one type of intolerance of minorities for another, and that is exactly what the SNP Act does by denying the rights of women and girls. But the important point is that the Labour spokesman, one of the architects of devolution, Henry McLeish, responded that the human rights might be devolved, but equal opportunities should not be devolved, that they should not be able to, that the Scottish Parliament should not be able to, and quote, that they should not be able to impose new duties or additional regulation in equal opportunities matters. It was expressly debated in the House of Commons, it was voted on in the House of Commons, and the SNP lost their amendment on that topic. Isn't it time now for the SNP to respect the devolution settlement? And can he write to the official opposition and ask them exactly what their response to his statement means. Why have the architects of devolution been replaced by weasels?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are fortunate to have a colleague of such great political sagacity amongst us, who was there when the legislation was brought forward, and he is right. It was voted for as a democratic bill that went through this Parliament, supported by all parties, and that is the instrument Section 35 that we're using today is part of that bill that was brought forward by the Labour Party and supported by the Scottish National Party back in 1998.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, whatever your views about the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, Nicola Sturgeon's obsession with independence has clouded her judgment, and she is showing disregard for the rest of the United Kingdom and its laws. It is her own party that voted in favour of Section 35 being included in the Scotland Act. The rights of women and other vulnerable groups should not be pawns in her constitutional game playing. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that invoking Section 35 of the Scotland Act is deeply unfortunate, but however necessary, because the GRR bill has not taken due consideration in UK-wide laws, and that is, in fact, it is Nicola Sturgeon that is failing to respect devolution and the UK-wide Equality Act with her dangerous actions?
Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker, I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady. I thank her for her comments. We do not believe, and it will be in the Statement of Reasons, that there are sufficient protections and safeguards in the GRR bill for women and children.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As a committed unionist, like every member on this side of the House, but also one that respects the devolution settlement, the principle of one legislature intervening on another legislature could set a significant and serious precedent. So can my right honourable friend reassure me that the reason he is using the Section 35 order is because of specific legal concerns, because of the impact of that legislation on all parts of the United Kingdom, including Scotland, rather than for any other political means seeking to undermine devolution?
Yes.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When we hear talk of agreed positions across the UK, what the Tory right-wingers mean, Scotland does your tell, and the Labour MPs are getting cheers from these guys over there want to have a look at themselves. But after 6 years of consultation and discussions about the GRR bill, when did the Secretary of State, when did this government suddenly discover that equal pay is somehow threatened by it? And what is the problem with equal pay that he says is under threat?
Well, the Minister for Women and Equality has raised that subject with the Bill Minister, and it will be explained in our Statement of Reasons. The adverse effects are numerous. And if you read the statement, you will see those points.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I believe that the liberties and responsibilities of all citizens across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom are equal, which is why, amongst other things, I keenly supported the extension of same-sex marriage to Northern Ireland. Now, I share the concerns about the rights of biological women to single-sex spaces, but I'm most concerned about the capacity of children, minors, to determine their own gender and embark on potentially life-changing physical transformations. This dispute has been confected by the SNP in pursuit of their separatist agenda. So does my right honourable friend agree that it really is shameful that they have weaponised vulnerable children in pursuit of that agenda, and would impose that agenda on the majority of children across the whole of the United Kingdom?
Yes.
Colonel Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When they finished. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In my role on the Public Affairs Constitutional Affairs Committee, I have with others been around the United Kingdom on scrutiny and the operation of devolution, of which I'm a strong supporter. The state of relationships between the Tories and the SNP is deleterious, and it's damaging all our rights. The SNP went to court to argue that sex was a legal construct, not a biological construct, and therefore has landed us in this position, and they are trading on people's rights. It's outrageous. They are disregarding sex-based rights, which is exactly... It's not acceptable for people to stand up to talk about women's sex-based rights and to be constantly badgered by men like that. Let us speak. Equally, don't accept barracking from the men in the corner over there. What we need to know now, and it'd be helpful to have the reasons before going forward, is what exactly the UK government, who has not discussed this in advance of this coming here before and behaved outrageously, what exactly are they expecting the SNP Scottish Government to do to help the rights of transgender people and women?
Well, I won't go into the details of Lady Haldane's judgment in December, but you're absolutely right. That has created part of the conflict, and that again we laid out in the statement of reasons. I'd say that to the Honourable Lady. What we would like the Scottish Government to do is to address the concerns we have around sufficient protections and safeguards for women and children across UK-wide legislation, and that to be reflected in the bill.
Bell. Can't have a point of order. Can't have a point of order. Can't have a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome the order the Secretary of State made today? I'm sure the legislation passed by Holyrood was well-intentioned, but in their unwillingness, and I don't know whether it was stubbornness or naivety, to accept that there will be a tiny minority of bad actors, passing that bill without the amendments that were proposed by my right honourable friend here and his colleagues means that they're putting the sex-based rights of women and girls across the United Kingdom at risk. And is that not the point, Secretary of State, that it's not just affecting Scotland, it's affecting women and girls across the United Kingdom?
Yes, indeed.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The real truth of the GRA discussion is that almost 5 years ago, this government opened up a consultation for GRA reform and did sweet nothing on it. Opened up that Pandora's box of fear and of hate and of misinformation. And then when one part of our country takes action, which we all should have taken action, they want to use it for a constructed constitutional crisis. Is it not time that this government bring forward proper GRA reform that includes the bases that are laid out in the Scotland Act and put to bed once and for all the lie that this is about equalities?
Well, I'm here to answer to the constitutional decision I've taken. But I suggest you go to orals and ask those questions of the Minister for Women and Equalities.
Rachel McLean.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in response to some of the comments from the SNP benches, I'm happy to look at myself and stand up here and speak about protections for 16 and 17-year-olds who are able to self-ID as a legal opposite sex, travel to this country and then become part of our society. There is a clear read across to the Equalities Act in our country. Having served in the Home Office and seen the desperate need for women and girls to be protected from grooming gangs, from predators, from sex offenders, to access those single sex-based services, which we thankfully have protections for them to do here.
Order. Let's not have that. You may not agree with what people are saying, but please have the respect that they have the ability to say what they want to say. This is what we should be doing in this House. Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Does the Secretary of State therefore agree with me? This is absolutely the right thing to do. I support his action, and women and girls across the country in the other 3 nations are also going to thank him for it.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and it is absolutely about safeguards and protecting safe spaces for women and children. She's absolutely right on that. And the risk of lowering the bar for bad faith actors, she makes that point as well.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Enacting Section 35 is disgraceful and unprecedented, and doing so brings the risk of this political tactic being used again. Does he envision Section 35 being used against any other bills progressing through Holyrood, and if not, why only this bill?
Well, I would say to the honourable lady that she's absolutely right. This is unprecedented. It is a very high bar. It was not a decision I reached easily or took lightly. but the legal advice was very strong, and it was for Section 35, and I have used it. But as I said earlier, 347 acts have gone through the Scottish Parliament in the last nearly 24 years. The system works. The Scotland Act 1998 works, but in that Act, whether you like it or not, but whether the SNP like it or not, however, remember they did vote for it in 1998. There is a Section 35 order, and it's for this type of event.
Okay. Caroline Johnson.
Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, there will be those in this House that agree and those that disagree with the substance of Scotland's Gender Recognition Reform Bill. But the SNP surely knew, as they rushed this legislation through Holyrood, that it would bring them into direct conflict with the UK Parliament legislation and with the devolution agreement. Indeed, some may speculate that that was their intention. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the SNP should respect the devolution agreement that they voted for and not use women, girls or transgender individuals as pawns in their separatist agenda?
Yes, and this, I'd say to my honourable friend, this is entirely a legal debate we're having. It's it's about the Scotland Act 1998, and we shouldn't be bringing in or politicising the transgender community, who I was disappointed by the First Minister's remarks yesterday. We respect them, we value them. This decision is entirely about the legal advice I've received.
In Blackford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, we often hear about respecting the Scottish Parliament, but isn't it the case that this absolutely demonstrates that power devolved is power retained? We accept that the Secretary of State has the powers enshrined in the Scotland Act under Section 35, but what the Secretary of State has just done is ignored the fact that parties that voted for this in the Scottish Parliament had a manifesto commitment. It has the majority support of the Scottish Parliament, and it absolutely demonstrates to everybody in Scotland that if you want to protect your Parliament, if you want to protect the rights of the Scottish Parliament to legislate and devolve matters, then we have to take away the threat of action from the Secretary of State. And the only way, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we protect our Parliament is by Scotland becoming independent.
Mr Speaker, I've just won a £10 note.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, this just proves to me, this latest debacle from the SNP proves that they are not fit to govern in Scotland. It's absolutely pathetic. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that this gender reform bill, so-called gender reform bill, from the SNP is just a pathetic, snidey attempt to use young people, a cynical attempt on their pathetic pathway to independence?
Mr Speaker, the position I accept is that what I'm doing here is addressing the legal issues as advised to by legal counsel. The issue here is adverse effects on UK-wide legislation, the Equalities Act, the Gender Recognition Act 2004, and that is what I'm entirely focused on.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I listened very carefully to what the Secretary of State said, but I didn't hear a clear explanation as to why the government believes the Scottish Gender Recognition Act conflicts with the UK Equality Act, as in all it does is it simplifies and demedicalises the process of transition. It doesn't change the status of somebody who has transitioned. That used to be Conservative Party policy. It's the policy of many other civilised countries, a growing number of countries. It's not good enough for him to say he's going to publish something later today. He speaks for the government. He needs to be able to explain the rationale for this drastic move here to the House now. The government also needs to explain what's it going to do with all those foreign nationals who come from countries that already have some form of self-identification. Is the government, the UK government, seriously going to take away their rights retrospectively?
Well, no, we're not, and the Minister for Women and Equalities has done a WMS on that. And regarding the changes, there are changes which are 16 to 18-year-olds self-ID without any medical diagnosis. These are changes, but most importantly, from the legal advice I have, and it will be in the Statement of Reasons, it's very detailed, which is why I don't want to bore everyone to death with it now. The Statement of Reasons shows the adverse effects on 2 pieces of UK-wide legislation, and that is the reason the Section 35 is deemed appropriate.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for standing firm on the facts against the noise. Does he agree with me that rather than manufacturing constitutional battles, the SNP would be better focusing their energies on fixing the failures across Scotland, not least in health and education?
Well, again, I don't want to bore everyone with a long list, but we could add ferries and many other things to that list.
Mary Black.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I notice that the Secretary of State fails to mention that this is the most consulted piece of legislation that has ever gone through the Scottish Parliament. So this idea that it is being rushed is nothing more than a lie. Now, as I've said, this is already an attack on devolution. It is an attack using and weaponising the most vulnerable group in our society. And on that note, I want to ask the Secretary of State then, just in his own words, what does he think the point of the Scottish Parliament is?
Well, the point of the Scottish Parliament is to serve the people of Scotland on the areas that are devolved to them, but to be clear, within the Scotland Act and the terms of the Scotland Act. And it's not an attack on devolution to use a Section 35 order where it's deemed appropriate by legal counsel. When the Scottish National Party voted for that very act themselves with that order in it.
Jonathan Gallis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the statement made by the Secretary of State, and I want to also place on record my support for the heroines such as J.K. Rowling and others who stand up despite the continued aggression and violent abuse they receive from certain people in this place and across the Scottish Parliament. Does the Secretary of State agree with me? This is simply about protecting young girls and women to their right to having safety in single-sex spaces, and this politicisation of that is an absolute abomination.
Well, it is, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's also about protecting the devolution settlement and 2 UK-wide acts.
Alison Thewlis.
Deputy Speaker, I've been contacted by Mackenzie, an inspirational woman I met recently in my constituency, and she says, I did not choose to be trans. I did not choose to have my rights taken away, and I certainly did not choose to have my life up for debate from people who don't even know or empathise with my community. So can he tell me, in the absence of the UK doing anything whatsoever about improving trans rights, why he's standing in the way of the Scottish Government making progress?
Well, I would suggest to the Honourable Lady, first of all, of course, we respect and support the trans community, but if she wants to raise specific issues, the Minister for Women and Equalities is very happy to have a meeting with you.
Paul Bristow.
Mr Deputy Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that if this House passed legislation that impinged on what should be a devolved competence, there would be howls of protest opposite? The fact they're shouting down women in this House over UK-based equality legislation show that this is not about equalities at all. It's all about bashing the UK, and for them, single-sex-based rights is just collateral damage.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very fair point. This is not, for me, about anything other than following the legal advice, the adverse effects of UK-wide equalities legislation, which, of course, involves safe single-sex spaces.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. There clearly, as we've heard, is disagreement about the process that is contained within the legislation the Scottish Parliament has passed. But could the Secretary of State clarify something? Because whether one agrees with that or not, the net result would be someone would be issued with a gender recognition certificate. He argues in invoking Section 35 that this would have serious adverse impacts on the operation of the Equality Act. Can he explain why the same certificate issued under the 2004 Act does not have those adverse impact.
Exactly.
What I say to the honourable gentleman, what we're trying to do here is avoid two different regimes which conflict either side of the border.
Nick Fletcher.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in full support of the Secretary of State's decision this morning. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the SNP are using this subject to deliberately cause division to further their single-issue campaign of creating an independent Scotland, regardless of the consequences to children and women across this nation?
It should be ashamed. It should be ashamed.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, that's the conclusion some people might have reached when listening to the question from the honourable member from Ross Skye and Lochaber.
Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Of course, members opposite impinged and devolved competencies in legislation last night when they voted for their anti-strike legislation. But can the Secretary of State tell us, since the Scottish Parliament has passed this gender recognition reform bill and his decision today, what correspondence has he had with the Scottish Government to try and resolve the issue? Or is it him that's a bad faith actor?
Well, as I think I've said, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister for Women and Equalities and officials, civil service officials, had a number of engagements. My involvement comes after the event because it is a constitutional involvement, but on the policy area, it was the gender policy area, it's absolutely for the Minister to have that engagement, and she not only wrote, she also had a meeting.
James Daly.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I very warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today? And does he agree with me that it does seem quite extraordinary that the criticism of his decision today seems to be that members opposite would have him not act upon legal advice which states that this legislation impinges upon the rights of women, children and some of the most vulnerable in our community. If the Scottish Secretary was not undertaking this action today, that would be a bigger outrage than what we have heard here today. This government is the defender of the rights of those who are most vulnerable and who need protecting in our society, and it is a disgrace that this has been painted in the constitutional light it is by the SNP for their own end rather than the rights of women and children in our country.
Absolutely, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Ardell.
This Tory government make me sick to my stomach. And if this Secretary of State is going to come to this House and trample all over trans rights, over Scottish democracy and over equality, he should at the very least do his homework, because he clearly knows as little about this bill as he does about devolution. So can the Secretary of State tell me, are he and his government so scared of democracy and equality that he really thinks it's justifiable to use one of the most marginalised groups in our society as political fodder in their anti-trans, anti-equality and anti-democratic endeavours?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't recognise any of those remarks. This is absolutely following legal advice and not taking the decision lightly on the adverse effects that this bill has on two UK-wide, GB-wide bills. And that is the position we're in. We have written to the Scottish Government to explain our position. We will lay the statement of reasons later. This is nothing to do with trampling over transgender rights. This is entirely to do with following a legal process and taking the legal advice that we sought.
Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State for Scotland knows the value in which I hold the Union, so I'm sure he will understand how difficult this is for me. But as a Scottish woman, the mother of a Scottish daughter, someone who has campaigned and continues to campaign and work for women's safety, I have heard the concerns, and I have looked at every clause and amendment of this bill, spoken with MSP colleagues from all parties, in the search for where it undermines the Equalities Act and the protections in single-sex spaces and others that it offers me and every other woman that I know. I can't find it. Some of the UK's finest legal minds have pored over this hugely scrutinised bill in great detail and found no conflict. But I can see where it actually guarantees that it will not challenge the primacy of the Equalities Act. So can the Secretary of State point me to the exact lines of this bill which he feels undermines my and every other woman's rights, and justify why he is playing fast and loose with the union and really doing so much to hurt the most vulnerable people in our society.
Well, that's simply not true. I'm looking to protect the vulnerable, as she will see. And the legal opinion may well be divided on this, but the legal opinion we've taken is that there are adverse effects on the Equalities Act and the Gender Recognition 2004 Act. And I note the First Minister's comments earlier today that she intends to take this to judicial review. So we'll find out in the Court of Opinion, whether the Court of Opinion that I've been hearing is right or wrong when we go to the legal courts.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would love to hear from the Minister more detail on the legal advice that has been given, because I'm still unclear how this would undermine the Equality Act. And I would also like to say, isn't it true that the only reason we are here is because of government failure to listen to its own consultation with 100,000 people responding to it, and also using trans people as a political football, for example, leaving them out of the conversion therapy until conveniently this week?
Well, look, I would urge the benches opposite to reflect the tone here. This is a legal decision. We need to take the heat out of this debate. What we are dealing with is a reduction in safeguards for women and children. That is the legal advice we have, and later when you read the Statement of Reasons, you will be able to draw your own conclusions.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the United Kingdom's first ever female First Minister is enjoying the lecture from the Secretary of State and the various Cicero tribute acts behind them on feminism and the protection of women's rights. Isn't it the case, Mr Deputy Speaker, that what we have here is a decaying government in its last months in office, needing some red meat for its base, an utterly supine Labour Party trying to triangulate through all of this? Meanwhile, trans people are the collateral damage. Just as Section 28 haunted Thatcher's government, Section 35 will always be associated with him. So let me ask him, he must surely have the Statement of Reasons in that folder on his knee. Read it out from the dispatch box.
We will publish the Statement of Reasons, and on the other remarks the honourable gentleman made, Mr Deputy Speaker, opinions may vary.
Ms Saville Roberts.
Lord Arif, this is a calculated attack on devolution, democracy and trans rights, and it's increasingly clear that this tired and bitter Tory government will weaponise any issue, no matter how sensitive, and they'll do that to subvert devolution. Now, if this is really about the Equality Act, ministers would be referring this to the courts. They wouldn't be withholding their own legal advice. They would be seen to have this tested in the courts, rather than taking, as they are, unprecedented unilateral action. So what does he have to say to the unionist Welsh Labour Minister, Vaughan Gething, who today said that this UK government undermines the union?
Well, obviously, Mr Deputy, I entirely agree. We are supporting the union. The devolution bill is what we believe in, and Section 35 order was democratically put there. And we believe that we have to take the legal advice we have. And people say, read out the Statement of Reasons. The Statement of Reasons and my order will have been submitted to the parliamentary authorities, and they'll be available in the time frame when they decide to release them this afternoon. And you will be able to read everything you want to read there as to the reasons behind this, but essentially it's about protecting and safeguarding women and children where we believe there are adverse effects.
Kirsty Blackman.
Speaker, against a background of rising hate crime, my trans siblings will be horrified and terrified at the level of misinformation and lies in this chamber today. Given that the Secretary of State has had lots of legal advice on this, presumably he's also had briefings on this, could he tell us what is the effect of a gender recognition certificate? What does it entitle someone to do.
Well, we believe we believe you'll see in the in the statement of reasons that there is a reduction. I make this very point very clear. There is a reduction in safeguards for women and children, and you will have plenty of time to read that today.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The reason why the government can't tell us exactly what the conflict is with the Equality Act is because there isn't one.
Yep.
The Scottish Gender Recognition Reform Bill does not affect the operation of the Equality Act, and everyone in this House knows that full well because Labour MSP Pam Duncan-Glancy put it on the face of the bill with their amendment. So will the Minister admit what this Section 35 order is really about, and that is fanning the flames of a culture war that is harming trans people across the UK?
No, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, that's an appalling thing to say. It is entirely addressing the legal advice that I've been given, and the legal advice tells me that there is a reduction in safeguards across conflicting with two UK-wide bills, and that is the reason for the Section 35 order, and that is why the advice was to use it, and it will be available to all this afternoon.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker, and as has been clarified by my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, this Act has been under consideration by the Scottish Parliament for 6 years. Yep. Now, if the UK government thought there was some legal basis to challenge the bill, why didn't they do so in the Supreme Court through a Section 33 order before now, as they've done previously?
I'm afraid I don't want to be rude to the honourable lady, but I'm afraid what she just said shows that she does not understand the Scotland Act or what actions are available to the United Kingdom government. We cannot bring forward a Section 33 Act while a bill is going through the Scottish Parliament, nor can we invoke a Section 35 Act while a bill is going through. Once the bill is finished its final stage, its third stage, there's a 28-day process, and the legal advice, which I must say, this legal advice is taken on all bills that the Scottish Parliament passes. That's part of the devolution settlement, and then we decide what course needs to be taken based on the advice we get. And on this occasion, the advice is that a Section 33 is not appropriate, but a Section 35 is.
Owen Thompson.
Speaker, I have to say I think it's exceptionally discourteous of the Secretary of State to consistently refer to this statement of reasons that nobody in here except him appears to be able to be seen. This isn't an urgent question. This wasn't something that he didn't know about. This was a statement that he brought himself. So we should have had the statement of reasons before we came to this statement. But I wanted to ask the Secretary of State, what is it about persistent electoral failure in Scotland that makes him so averse to following the principles of basic democracy?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is beyond parody. It's democracy. Democracy is what the Scotland Act is. Section 35 is in the Scotland Act. The SNP voted for the Scotland Act with Section 35 in it. It is a democratic instrument.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and agree that women and girls must be protected and safeguarded. The Minister will be aware that a precedent was set for the circumnavigation of devolution when Government here brought abortion and demand legislation for Northern Ireland. With great respect to my colleagues and this friend, who, I recall the members who are my friends representing Scotland, I do not recall the members defending the cause then for Northern Ireland. So will the Minister confirm the precedent supported by many who are opposing today means that the Government retains a right to step in for issues that they deem to be equality and human rights?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Northern Ireland bills, so I won't stray into that area. But I will say that the protections and safeguards for women and children that we have been advised need to be looked at by these adverse effects. That's what we're dealing with the Section 35 Act today, which is part of the Scotland Act.
Dave Dugan.
Mr. Speaker, you would think
that before pulling the trigger on a Section 35, you'd be absolutely across your brief.
Yep.
But it seems today that the Secretary of State hasn't got a clue about this at all. We've heard very little about process and even less about substance. But the Secretary of State says that this would have significant impact on, amongst other things, GB-wide equality matters in Scotland, England and Wales. What consultation, can I ask then, has he had with the Welsh Government or Senate before this drastic intervention? Or is this really an issue for the de facto English Government as a priority? And isn't it the case that with independence looming larger than ever before this crumbling union, this is an act of desperate democratic vandalism?
No, I believe the UK Government did consult a number of years ago. The Minister for Women Equalities tells me did consult a number of years ago, and Wales would have been included in that consultation. But the point is that there is no democratic whatever that you're saying. It's entirely a democratic bill that has Section 35 in it, that we are now using that order to protect what we believe is women and children's safeguards, because we believe they are undermined by the cut across into 2 GB-wide bills.
Wayne David.
Speaker, in his response to the Shadow Secretary of State, the Secretary of State for Scotland said that Article 35 in the 1998 Act was not an instrument of last resort. But then, after that, there was the Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2012, which made it an instrument of last resort by common agreement. So I want to ask the Secretary of State, what discussions on a constitutional basis has he had with the First Minister of Scotland to avoid this impasse?
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I thank the honourable gentleman for that point, because it's not the last resort. What I said to his honourable friend, is that we have 28 days. We take the legal advice. We have to act within that 28 days, because then, failing that, the bill goes for royal assent, and that's the time frame we operate in. There's then the opportunity for further discussions with the Scottish Government to see if we can get the legislation in scope. We made the same offer with the UNCRC bill, which we took to a Section 33, and that offer still stands. We're happy to discuss with the Scottish Government what amendments can be made to the bill to get it in scope and not cut across have adverse effects in UK-wide legislation. So, you know, last resort isn't last. There's never quite a last resort when you can go on talking and discussing and trying to resolve your differences.
Stuart Housie. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's true that UK ministers do have the right to interfere under Section 35 in Scottish legislation on the grounds of defence, national security, international obligations, or if the Scottish legislation modifies or has an adverse effect on UK reserved law. That much is clear. But given the Tory chair of the Women and Equalities Committee has said that the GRR legislation, quotes, does not change the Equalities Act, and that the Scottish Secretary has been singularly incapable of giving a single example of where it might. This is not about process. This is a debate on principle. And would it not be better, instead of interfering, instead of engaging in a rather crass culture war, if the Scottish Secretary apologised to trans people, apologised for trampling over Scottish democracy, folded up his little red folder and removed the threat to interfere?
Well, I ask again, let's just take the heat out of this debate. This is about the 2010 Equalities Act, which is a GB-wide piece of legislation, and the legal advice we have that there are adverse effects to that bill. That's entirely what it is, and that will be published this afternoon in the Statement of Reasons.
Stephen Furry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I stand in solidarity with Scottish colleagues across the political spectrum.
It is worth pointing out that it's important that we do harmonise equality and rights issues upwards, but the UK is not a unitary state in these matters. The Secretary of State has jumped backwards and forwards in terms of describing the Equality Act as either UK-wide or Great Britain. It does not apply in Northern Ireland, just to make that very clear in terms of the record. But in particular, does the Secretary of State recognise that similar legislation has been in place in the Republic of Ireland for over 7 years now? And we in the UK have the common travel area with Ireland, which has reciprocal rights of freedom of movement and also in terms of social security and other areas. So if the government can manage to live with a different system of GRA in Ireland, why not Scotland?
Well, last time I looked, the Republic of Ireland wasn't part of Great Britain or the United Kingdom. It is absolutely the case that we're talking about British citizens here being affected. I'm told there is no devolved administration anywhere in Europe that has different gender rules to the state.
Mr. Oswald.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker, thank you. It's really very regrettable that the Secretary of State has come here today on this issue and with so little information. I think that all of those, this very vulnerable group who are impacted by what he is wanting to do, really deserve significantly better than the Secretary of State standing up repeatedly with absolutely no information, telling us that a statement of reasons will be published later, and yet he is unable to tell us what these reasons are. It is his job to tell us what these reasons are, and he has singularly failed to do that today. It is no wonder that his former colleague, the former Scottish Conservative Head of Communications, Andy McKeever, when looking at how the UK Government is dealing with this issue, has described the UK Government intervening here as an act of constitutional vandalism. And he said it demonstrates Westminster's superiority complex in overdrive. Does the Secretary of State recognise that people will reasonably and rightly feel that way, and that as well as their concerns about this marginalised group, they will feel extremely unhappy about this overriding of our democracy?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, no. I hope people will realise that the United Kingdom Government has been given legal advice that raises concerns for women and children and their safeguards and protections and adverse effects to UK-wide legislation, and that we are acting on that, and we have the backs of women and children across the United Kingdom and in Scotland if their safeguards and their single-sex spaces only and etc. are impinged upon. If that's the issue, if that is the issue that you will see in the Statement of Reasons, if that's the concern, we believe it is right to act on that for all citizens of Great Britain.
Mr. Speaker, the Women's Equalities Committee in 2021 published a report which clearly stated then, and is still the case now, that the gender recognition certificate did not impinge on women or girls' rights. It was very clear and very unequivocal. It stated very clearly that the exclusions applied in all instances and that women and girls would continue to be protected regardless of the Gender Recognition Certificate. The same applies in this case to the Gender Recognition Reform Act, and there is nothing within the proposals that contradicts that. So will the Minister stand here today, now, clearly, and issue very outline of what legal advice he has been given and state here in this chamber right now what the legal advice is, because we're still waiting.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in short, two different regimes create adverse effects.
See MacDonald.
Hey, Mr. Speaker, these answers are absolutely pathetic. Can I ask, why is it that states and territories in the US and Canada and Australia can successfully operate self-ID without interference or complaint from either neighbouring territories or from central government, but that can't happen here where we're supposed to have the most powerful devolved parliament in the world? And secondly, can I ask him, why does the Equalities Unit fact sheet produced by his government for its own consultation on self-ID state clearly there will be no change to the provision of women-only spaces and services? This has been the law since 2010 and will not change. He's grubbing around for legal advice in order to peddle myths in this chamber, is he not?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did say that there was no devolved administration in Europe that had different gender rules to the state, but the honourable gentleman raises the USA, Canada and Australia, where there's no central ID law because they're very differently. They are federal structures.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, could the Secretary of State maybe take some heat out of this argument by confirming a few matters of fact that a lot of his colleagues seem to be unaware of? Could he confirm that this Rush piece of legislation has been under 6 years of scrutiny by the Scottish Parliament? Could he confirm that during that period, in the last Scottish Parliament elections, an overwhelming majority of MSPs were elected on explicit manifesto commitments in favour of this legislation? Could he confirm that there is absolutely nothing in this legislation that makes any difference to the rights or ability of anybody to go into any protected single-sex space in Scotland or anywhere else in the world? And finally, will he confirm that when he eventually has a courtesy to let us see what he intends to put forward and the advice on which it is based, will he guarantee that this House will have a further chance to consider and vote on what he's proposing?
Well, I didn't catch all of everything. My tinnitus gets the better of me sometimes, and I didn't catch everything the honourable gentleman said. But I think he asked if. I mean, as to all the legal reasons, we've covered that 100 times today. But as to whether or not there'll be a chance for another debate and another vote, my understanding with Section 35 is that the opposition have 40 days to pray upon it, and that would then lead to a debate in this Parliament.
Greg.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Secretary of State for vetoing Scotland is going to be quite disappointed when he eventually gets to the House of Lords, because not even for all its faults does the House of Lords have the kind of veto power that he's exercising today. Indeed, even the United States President, if he vetoes a bill, it is subject to checks and balances by the Congress. So just further to my friend and further to what he just said, if a motion is tabled praying against the Section 35 order, will the government guarantee that time will be made available for a debate and a vote on the floor of this House?
Well, that, Mr. Speaker, is a question for the Leader of the House.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, in the earlier oral statement by the Secretary of State for Scotland, he said it is open to the Scottish Government to bring back an amended bill for reconsideration in the Scottish Parliament. Can I ask what provisions would need to be added or taken away from the original bill to make it acceptable to this Government?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I think I said earlier that basically, regarding the amendment, any amendment to the bill, if the Scottish Government wanted to bring it back, they have to address. I know there are difficulties for them in this, but they would have to address the central issue, which is that we don't believe in the cross-cut against GB legislation that there are sufficient protections and safeguards for women and children. And there is, as I say, it is as reflected in existing Westminster legislation.
Don't need the figures. Right.
No, taken after.
No, I'm going to take point of orders. I want to get through to this. After the 10-minute rule bill, I will take points of order before, depending on what the House decides. I call Stephen Flynn to make an application for leave to propose a debate on a specific and important matter that should have urgent consideration. Under the terms of Standing Order number 24, the honourable member has 3 minutes in which to make such an application. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to seek your permission to have a debate this afternoon under Section 24 of Standing Orders in respect of the unprecedented and unjustifiable decision of this United Kingdom government to overturn the views and the legislative programme of the democratically elected members of Scotland's National Parliament in Holyrood. Mr. Speaker, the arguments on this matter are lengthy. Some of them have just been covered. Many more will hopefully be covered in a debate to come, should you so seek to grant it, and I am not seeking to be presumptuous in that regard, but should you seek to grant it, I will endeavour to cover those many points and to highlight to this chamber and to the public the democratic shortfall that exists at the heart of this supposed union of equals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member asks leave to propose a debate on a specific and important matter that should have urgent consideration, namely that this House has considered the Government's decision to use Section 35 of the Scotland Act with regard to the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill. I have listened carefully to the application of the honourable member I am satisfied that the matter raised by the honourable member is proposed to be discussed under Standing Order number 24, and that the honourable member has leave of the House. If no objection, we then come to the motion that the member has obtained the leave of the House. The debate will be held today immediately after the 10-minute rule motion. The debate will last 2 hours and will arise on the motion that the House has considered that the specific matter set out in the honourable member's application. I shall remind the House that the Standing Order number 24 provides for additional time taken by this debate to be added on the end of the proceedings of the safety bill. Right, let us now go to the 10-minute rule bill. I said I was going to deal with them after the 10-minute rule bill. I'm going to put them all together. Okay. We now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Simon Baines.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to undertake a review of the support available to markets and market traders and of the options for improving that support and for connected purposes. Markets, Mr. Speaker, are close to my heart, as my grandfather's butcher's business, R.A. Dodds, was based in the Granger Market in Newcastle, where they had 5 stalls, and from where they expanded between the wars to establish shops across Northumberland. I grew up hearing stories of the family business, which sadly no longer exists, but the memories are still strong, as I found a few years ago when visiting the Granger Market. Also, when I was Mayor of Llanfachlin 5 years ago, I played a key part in establishing a farmers' market in the town each summer. I am delighted to have 11 colleagues from across the House as co-sponsors of this bill, and I know they, like me, strongly support their local markets, particularly my constituency neighbour, the Honourable Member for Wrexham, with whom I, as the MP for Clwyd South, share the parliamentary representation of Wrexham County Borough Council. The city of Wrexham has its origins as a market town, and the livestock market was at one time the largest in Wales. The People's Market is now Tŷ Pawb, the Central Market continues in its traditional way, and the Butcher's Market is due for redevelopment next year to offer a wide range of high-quality Welsh food and drink. Markets also play an important role in Clwyd South, where street and specialist markets held in Llangollen, on the Rheg estate and elsewhere in the constituency make a marked contribution to our society. I was also, until August last year, the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Markets Group, which gave me further valuable insight into the successes and needs of the markets industry. Markets are part of the history and tradition of many towns and cities in the UK. The most recent survey of the markets industry indicates some 1,150 traditional markets are now trading at an outlet for an amazing figure of over 32,000 small and medium-sized enterprises. They exist through charters from the Crown, custom and practice, and statutory legislation. In addition, there are numerous specialist markets, continental and Christmas markets, that generate essential footfall for town and city centres and support local economies, tourism, hospitality and employment. 2 national organisations represent the markets industry: the Association of British Market Authorities, NABMA, that focuses on market operators, local authorities, private operators, CICs and charities, and the National Market Traders Federation, NMTF, that supports market traders across the UK. Both organisations currently meet with the government through the Retail Forum and the All-Party Parliamentary Markets Group. Slowly, the market industry is returning from the financial community and personal damages of COVID. The recovery has seen some markets enjoying success in attracting investment as part of exciting regeneration schemes, but for others the picture is still not encouraging. The NABMA 2022 survey was the first meaningful assessment of the state of the markets industry since the pandemic. The main headlines and questions arising from the survey of 241 markets are as follows. Stall occupancy has fallen from a national average of 77% 4 years ago to 72%. Street markets and outdoor covered markets have seen the greatest decline. How can we reverse the decline? More markets are operating, that they are operating at a loss, a 6% increase from 4 years ago. Only 40% of markets are trading with a surplus. Is this sustainable going forward, and how can this be reversed? Markets feature heavily as part of town and city regeneration for a number of local authorities. How can government funding be attracted to deliver successful and modern markets? Traditional family businesses are declining, especially those specialist businesses such as butchers and fishmongers. How does the market industry attract new and younger traders? Markets are at the heart of local communities. They are part of local history, but also have a key role to play in the future of communities and government initiatives, particularly levelling up. A key area for the government to address is on business rates. In 2022, business rates assessed on markets totalled over £20 million. The Chancellor announced the relief of business rates for many businesses, but due to an anomaly, local authority markets do not enjoy the benefits of this measure. Now, because of restrictions in the local authority finance legislation, a local authority cannot grant a concession to itself on business rates, whereas private markets can take advantage of the benefit. Therefore, a key part of the review called for in this bill would be for the government to look at extending business rate relief to local authority markets, including parish, town and community councils. Markets operated under charitable trusts should also be beneficiaries. The markets industry has taken several important initiatives via NAMA and NMTF to address areas which need more support. I believe that these initiatives provide pointers to the areas in which the government could focus its support for the industry. Firstly, recognising the fall in market occupancy in local businesses, the industry is delivering a campaign entitled Grow a Business in 2023 to attract more individuals to try out market trading. This is especially for young traders, but also individuals that are looking at a second or new career. Part of the historic success of market trading is to see small businesses prosper and grow and then move into the local high street. Never has this been more important. Secondly, the industry's Young Traders Market campaign celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2022. From relatively small beginnings, it has grown into an incredibly successful campaign. The winners go on to 10 regional finals involving 250 young people, and then 90 of them go to the national final held in Stratford-upon-Avon. During the campaign, many sustainable businesses have been created, and it is a flagship for the industry. Thirdly, the Love Your Local Market campaign has gone from strength to strength over the last 12 years. Its origin lay in the Mary Portas Review into the Future of the High Streets, which was commissioned by former Prime Minister David Cameron in 2011. The government at the time was concerned with the same issues as concern the government today, the contraction of retail, and it was seeking to deliver real change in communities and make towns multifunctional places to live, work and visit. Markets featured prominently in the Porter's report, which said markets can serve as fundamental traffic drivers back to our high streets. The Love Your Local Market campaign, which is now in its 12th year, attracts more and more support and is now celebrated around the world in over 25 countries. Government provided funding support to launch the campaign, which serves as an important catalyst to change. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the value of markets to our local communities is widely recognised, and I know that the government is keen to be as supportive as possible. As is called for in this bill, a review by the government of the support available for markets and of the options for improving that support would be welcomed with open arms by market operators and traders alike, and bring lasting benefits to our communities across the length and breadth of the UK.
This would normally be the opportunity for one MP who wishes to oppose this 10-minute rule motion to do so. I see nobody wishes to do so, and I have had no indication either. So I will just pose the question. And the question is that honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Sarah Atherton, Paul Bristow, James Daly, Sally Ann Hart, Mr David Jones, Ben Lake, Robin Miller, Robbie Moore, Helen Morgan, Jim Shannon, Matt Vickers and myself, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Baines.
Markets and Market Traders Review of Support Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 24th of February, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Friday the 24th of February. Thank you very much. Right. Order, please. Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very grateful for you taking a point of order. In the earlier programme in the House, you rightly agreed for a Section 24 emergency application, which the House has agreed to hold today. But I fear we may have a bit of an empty debate because the statement of reasons for why the government have called the Section 35 order, which is unprecedented, it's never happened in the history of this House before, have not been given to members and will not be laid until later this afternoon in the library. And I wonder if it could seek your guidance on whether or not the Section 24 debate should be postponed until such times as not only have they been published, but we've had time to digest them.
Can I just say, we have got the Secretary of State with us. I don't know we'd like to inform the House where we're up to.
Secretary of State, thank you, Mr Speaker. We laid the order at 12:34 with the statement of reasons. The House authorities have to clear it before they publish it. They won't do that till 5 p.m. However, what I have got dispensation to do from Mr Speaker, I have got dispensation to publish it on the UK Gov website, the statement of reasons. We're doing that now. They're being emailed to you, to the Honourable Member for Edinburgh West, and to the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South. You are having them emailed, the statement of reasons emailed to you now.
A point for this, Mr Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In relation to what the Secretary of State for Scotland has just said, we've had in excess of an hour's worth of questioning to him, where he's repeatedly mentioned the statement of reasons, which we have until this point not seen. I'm now being told that I'm going to receive the statement of reasons. I think it would be wise, Mr Speaker, with your guidance, for the House to be suspended so that all of us can consider those reasons in full prior to the debate, because they will have, obviously, an intrinsic value to all of us in that regard.
Further to that point of order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Further to that point of order.
Sorry, further to that point of order, and then I will come. Yes. Go on now.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It remains, or I remain to be convinced, whether or not the Secretary of State understands the effect of a gender recognition certificate, but it is surely now apparent that he does not understand the concept of parliamentary accountability. Since, as long as I have been in this House, if the House were to be made aware of a government document or a publication of any sort, it was placed in the House of Commons library. It was not sent by email to individual named members. Surely all members of this United Kingdom Parliament have an interest in knowing what the government position is, and there is no good reason for this unprecedented departure from previous process.
For the point of
Grateful, Mr Speaker. I mean, this has been an absolute utter mess today. The Secretary of State made a voluntary statement. He wasn't forced to the House through an urgent question. He came voluntarily. And central to the government's case has been that the GRR bill, as passed by the Scottish Parliament, conflicts with the Equality Act. And he has a statement of reasons as to why that is the case. He never provided that statement of reasons for members to question him on. Now he's going to be supplying it through email. Could I insist that you follow the leader of the Scottish National Party, so that we have an opportunity to adjourn to consider this properly, that we could come back and question the Secretary of State, who has to be at the dispatch box in the next debate on these statements of reasons, so we get to question them on the reasons why this UK government is invoking a Section 35 order against this legislation.
Point of order, Christine.
Very much, Mr Speaker. I noticed that the Secretary of State in the previous session said that he had not brought the statement of reasons and that he did not want to bore us with it. And I found that quite an extraordinary statement to make, given the gravity of the situation and the gravity of the subject matter that we are dealing with. I wonder if he has now changed his mind and doesn't think that it is something that is tedious and boring for us to deal with, but actually realises that this is a serious, important piece of dialogue that we should have had from him in advance of this session. And I wonder if you're able to give us any guidance, Mr Speaker, on how everyone who wanted to contribute to the previous session and didn't have the information might be able to contribute to this session in full possession of the information.
Further point of order, Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if you can advise the House if this situation has any precedent where a Government Minister or Secretary of State can turn up at the dispatch box without the necessary accompanying information to advise and guide the discussion and debate in a question session, which it seems to, in my experience here since I was elected, Mr Speaker, seems to be the way that things are supposed to have been done. Is this precedented or is this unprecedented, this shambolic behaviour from the Secretary of State for Scotland?
Right, well, I think we've got to try and make some progress. Sorry, Owen Thompson, I know. Go on.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate that. I seek your advice, and I apologise to Mr Deputy Speaker for trying to intervene during the question session. However, I think it's important because the statement of reasons is clearly a critical factor in the discussion we're having. We've not been able to question the Secretary of State on it through the statement he made at a time when he brought the statement. We're going to have a debate which is encouraging and welcome, but most of us want to have a chance to have seen the statement of reasons before that starts. So can I ask for your advice, Mr Speaker, as to what further opportunities, even beyond this Section 24 debate, members of this chamber will have to question the Secretary of State in detail on the statement of reasons when they eventually get around to publishing it?
Brown, I think that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So further to that point of order, as has been said, with over an hour of questions there, a voluntary statement from the Secretary of State, they kept referring to the statement of reasons, but yet wouldn't divulge any information. It also kept referring to the Women Equalities Minister and said that she would actually be able to answer all the questions. So, Mr Speaker, did at any point did the Government discuss who was the most appropriate person to bring forward this statement so that we could actually, as honourable members, question the Government properly and ask somebody that actually had some knowledge to be able to answer questions?
Right. We're going to have to make some No, I'm going to come. It's slightly separate, so don't worry. What I want to do is to try and say, look, in an ideal world, yes, it would be easier. It is now live, and I hope that it should have been emailed to certain members to ensure that they can see it. Don't shake your head just yet, just check if you want, that be helpful. What I would say is, we could argue that the Secretary of State has set it out for over an hour in which he answered the question, which he answered the question on. But what I want to do is ensure that this debate goes ahead. We could have put it off to tomorrow, and quite rightly you wanted it today, which is important. So I'm going to go ahead. It's not the best way to start the debate. I do ask you to check. I am assured it is online and is available for members to do. But I do want to do this next very important point of order, which I've been waiting. Mr Flynn, do you want to come in on this? Because I do want to separate the two.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have many skills at my disposal, but the ability to speak whilst also looking at the Government's statement of reasons is certainly not one of them. I think it is entirely unfair for me as an elected member in this House to partake in a debate which you have kindly granted, and I appreciate that, without being in full possession of the facts. That is not my fault, Mr Speaker. That is the fault of the Secretary of State for Scotland, who, whilst undermining Scotland's devolution, he's not just undermining Scotland's devolution, Mr Speaker, he's undermining this place, and that is of serious consequence to you, I imagine.
No, I'm going to answer that point of order first, I think. What I would say is that this isn't the end. This is the beginning. There will be lots of opportunities where this will further be discussed. But I want to make sure this debate starts, and it's important that you do lay out the facts. Hopefully during this time you will have been started to read it. What I want to do is deal with the point of order from Amy Callan, who's quite rightly been waiting, and I wanted to separate the two issues because I do believe it's an important point.
Mr Speaker, on a point of order, I seek your advice as to what options are open to correct the record after the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, who is no longer in his place, spread misinformation in his question that people in this House and in Holyrood are inciting violence on the issue of the GRR.
That's disgraceful.
That is a matter of opinion, but what I would say, and I really do recommend that members are very careful in the language that they use, And it is important that we show tolerance, but more importantly, that we show respect to each other, and nothing should inflame the tensions that will already be running high. So I thank the honourable member for raising that point with me. I do say to all members, please think long and hard before you speak, because messages that you say in this House can be reflected in a way that I do not wish to see. Right. Let us... Oh, sorry, I forgot about you, Mr. Christopher Joe.
Mr. Speaker, this is a relatively trivial point of order compared with the previous ones, but nevertheless, it relates to the procedures in this House. And you were present in the chair during topical questions today, and you would have heard the Energy Minister seemingly criticise me for not having given prior notice of the topical question which I chose to ask. I had originally in mind to ask a different question, but because that earlier question has